Hey everyone, Norm here. Before we get started, I want to let you know that today's video is made possible with support from GiveWell. I'm going to tell you more about them later, but before that, here's Adam.
Hey everybody, Adam Savage here in my cave next to my summer build. This occupied all of the summer of 2021, and by now, hopefully, you have seen the epic 4-part build series of the weeks and weeks we spent building 2 of these in the shop to help G4 launch their network this fall. And for me, this was an entirely successful build. I had so much fun building these. They really kicked my ass. We had a small team here in the cave building them, and G4 could not have been a better partner. And nothing would make me happier than for you to be inspired enough to want to make your own spacesuit based on this build. And in that vein, I'm going to cover some of the pieces of this at a higher granularity to help you understand how this process came to be. One of the first things you guys had questions about in the comments, and by the way, the comments are like wonderful. Thank you for that, was about the weathering. And I got to tell you, I've often talked about props as like I love building them, and sometimes I think I build them just to get to the part of weathering them. And this is no different, but weathering cloth is not one of my core competencies. It is a fundamentally different operation than weathering a sword or a sidearm or a boot, for instance. And in that vein, I spent a lot of time thinking about using acrylics, about wetting it down and layering in some washes of acrylics and inks and coffee stains and stuff like that. And I did a bunch of tests off camera over the weeks before I finally had to do the weathering on this. And in the end, I didn't go with any of my test techniques. I ended up going almost entirely into powder weathering. And I found this company, Manhattan Wardrobe Supply, that makes weathering powders. And so these come in what's called a pounce bag. My hand's going to get dirty just lifting this out. A pounce bag is simply a bag of cloth filled with a powder. I use these in mold making, where I will fill it full of cornstarch, and I'll dust my silicone molds with cornstarch before casting them. And that helps the resin run in. And it's a great way to impart powder because you just a little bit, yeah, see that? I have never looked as dirty as at the end of the day when I weathered these 2 suits. I looked like a coal miner. Manhattan Wardrobe Supply makes many different colors of different powders for weathering. I used 3 for this. I used New York Soot, which has a very brown dark quality, but it's not black. I used black to help tune it back. And then to kill the black when it was too extreme, I used a light gray. The biggest issue with weathering is adding too much too quickly. And then you've got to balance it out for the rest of the thing that you're weathering. So if I put black on here and I wasn't able to get it off, that's problematic because then I've got this big patch that draws your eye. And weathering is all about not drawing your eye. So what the gray allowed me to do was to put on the New York Soot and the black and then bring it back and blend it in. And it was just a regular process of doing that. I can tell you that this is a lot of gray over the black and the New York Soot. And it really it gave me the ability to kind of refine whole areas rather than worry too much about going too dark in one zone. I wore a respirator the whole time. So should you. This stuff is not fun to breathe. I do think they work to use powders that aren't toxic. I don't think any of us are using true original diatomaceous earth anymore or Fuller's earth. I think there are more healthy alternatives these days. But Manhattan Theatrical Supply's weathering powders were just like, oh, contains talc and pigment. Yeah, there's basically talc and pigment. Fantastic stuff. I ended up doing my Ghostbusters uniform, which was the costume I built after this, using the same technique. And that's not how they did the originals. Like on Afterlife, the costume department actually used acrylics, and they went through dozens and dozens of different techniques. They made hundreds of swatches for Jason to choose from. And I think those were acrylic washes and paint weathering. It's a skill I hope to have someday, but I don't currently have. So until then, for me, it's all going to be powders because it gives me a lot more of the freedom that I crave for that. All right, the second thing that you guys asked about was the work lights. And I have several different lighting systems in this, but the work lights are these guys. This is an interesting one because when I'm building something that you haven't seen before, and I'm trying to build this like fictional spacesuit. And as such, I don't want you to recognize what lights I put up here. I bought a bunch of different kinds of lights. Like I bought these flashlights, these little right angle flashlights, because I thought I could unscrew this bezel and pop those down here. And then when I did, it looked like I had kind of attached a flash. It just didn't look right. It looked like I had bolted a product onto this thing. So then I went on to Amazon and I was like, okay, LED spotlight, maybe a spotlight. And that's when I found the light of my dreams. And it is these guys. These are dimmable, warm white LED spots, and they're specifically for museum displays. And these are freaking awesome. They're in aluminum, painted. They've got this little barrel core, and they're actually aimable because they've got a little ball and socket, little silicone socket and a little aluminum ball that sits nicely in there. And so for each of the two helmets, I actually did two different arrangements. For mine, I simply bored a hole the size of this barrel and pushed them through so they're all pointed in the same direction. But for G4's work lights, I actually mounted the base so that they were aimable. I wanted them to look like two different iterations of the same invention, or like, you know, two different years of the same piece. I didn't buy these for this. I actually bought these for a totally different project in which I wanted to display things in the round with a little spotlight on each one. And that's when I found these. It just turned out that, like, as I'm looking through my LED drawer, I happened to find these guys and they answered the call. They're also completely dimmable. Yeah, these were fantastic. Perfect display lights, especially for over the last few years, I've been collecting some wonderful pieces from Tom Spina and Phil Tippett, and I eventually plan to have like a whole long shelf of studio scale maquettes of some beautiful things like the Rancor and the Tauntaun. These lights will very plausibly be part of that museum display because they give me directional spotlights. They're fabulous. Fabric is another one. Remember I said the thing about like you don't want this thing to be recognizable. This is something that we talked to our friends at FBFX about a lot, because they did the Martian suit, they did the Prometheus suit, Alien Covenant. I mean, they do amazing stuff. But when they did the lighting on the Martian suit, you might have noticed that after that, everybody's spacesuits had the same kind of strip lighting. And they said they spent a lot of time looking for the newest light in order to, so that they're like ahead of that curve. And I did the same thing here. I found... I was going to talk about the fabric, but now I'm going to talk about the lights. This light strip is actually called a COB. Now, they make this in multiple different lengths and multiple different cuttable sizes, but I bought this one that was effectively 32 inches long, runs on 5 volts USB power, but you can buy them in 12 volts. They're cuttable almost every ½ inch, so you can tune it to exactly the length you need. And on that camera, it looks like a continuous light. From here, you can actually see that it is small bulbs, literally about 1/8 of an inch apart, covered by a silicone strip. And they end up looking like almost like a piece of neon. They're absolutely beautiful. This is like, that's the institutional knowledge we learned from FBFX. Go look for the light that no one else is using yet, and put that in your construction. By the same token, the fabric was really important to me, to find something that also felt sort of novel. I love the look of NASA's, the beta cloth that actually clads NASA's suits. And if you can see it really, really close up, what you would notice is that it's kind of a ripstop in that there's a grid superimposed on the pattern, and that grid aids the mechanical strength of the fabric. I wanted to look for the same thing, but the fact is, your standard ripstop nylon is a look we all know. We all have a jacket or some piece or bag or fanny pack that is made out of that stuff. And so when you see it on a spacesuit, you'd be like, oh, they just use that stuff. So I went looking for, God, I probably bought like 6 different samples of fabric to find this ripstop, which has an incredibly small pattern. I would say it's like Hold on, I can tell you exactly what it is. Yeah, they're maybe 90 thou. They're absolutely tiny. And if you're wondering why I have a whole bolt, it's because I ordered a bolt and it didn't arrive. So I had to order a second bolt to get the fabric in time. And then, of course, the first bolt arrived. So I ended up with twice as much fabric as I need. But that means I get to show you the unsullied fabric. I really like the way this looks. I liked the way it looked when I brought out my phone and looked at it on camera. That's another thing that I do with each of these pieces is I don't just look at it with my eye. I actually turn on the camera on my phone and I look at it and I see how it reads. I see how it moves. Because that's going to be the thing. I'm building this to be filmed. And so I really want to know how it looks through a lens. And everything looks different. It's a really important step to take. I also, when I got a sample of this fabric, I also played around with weathering it. I wanted to make sure that there wasn't some property to it I didn't know about that would make it impervious to weathering or make it take weathering too strongly. With a project like this, each piece was actually very carefully kind of crept up on. The other advantage of this fabric is it was super cheap. I think it was like less than 10 bucks a yard because it's a basic nylon ripstop. But I think that the way it ends up showing the weathering, or the way you end up kind of seeing the grid at the tops here, that just ends up feeling really perfect to me. Oh, also, Christine Noble, who did all the sewing on this, really was paying attention to NASA's xEMUs and noticing where they were cutting and sewing parts on the bias. That is not necessarily straight up and down, but on an angle. And so all of these arm parts are actually sewn on a 45-degree bias. And it just lends to the sort of dynamism of how it actually looks. Tiny choices like that can make all the difference into how the thing ends up looking. If all of these squares were straight up and down, you'd probably start to have your eye drawn to things like, oh, they're not exactly straight. But you cut them on the bias and it tells a different story to your eye. That was a great choice that she made.
All right, before I continue, I want to let you know about GiveWell. During this time of year, a lot of people are thinking about how to make their charitable donations, and one awesome option is GiveWell. They're a nonprofit that helps you simplify the process because they do their own independent research on the top, highest impact, evidence-backed charities. In fact, they do over 20,000 hours of research every year to help you make your decisions. Over 50,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $750 million. And they emphasize donating to charities that have evidence of saving or improving lives. And here's the best part. GiveWell is free. GiveWell wants to empower as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about their donations. They publish all their research and recommendations on their site for free with no sign-up required. They allocate your tax-deductible donation to the charity you choose without taking a cut. GiveWell spends over 20,000 hours each year researching charitable organizations and only recommends a few of the highest impact evidence-based charities they've found. GiveWell is matching donations from first-time donors dollar for dollar up to $250. Click on the link below to donate and make sure to use the fundraiser code TESTED at checkout to make sure your donation gets matched. All right, back to Adam.
The other innovation in this suit was comms. One of the biggest problems with cosplay that I have is being able to hear from inside a costume. I often can't wear my hearing aids inside the costume because they would tend to feed back and it doesn't actually augment, it inhibits my hearing when it's inside an enclosed space. So for this one, I went through a bunch of iterations to settle on one that was really, really simple. First off, I wondered to myself, does anyone make noise-canceling headphones that aren't wireless? And the answer is, yeah. They make a set that's like 20 bucks. And here they are. These work great, and I don't have to worry about charging a battery. See, if I'm gonna wear noise-canceling headphones in here, I don't want some extra radio signal to have to worry about and connect at the last minute, and all of a sudden Bluetooth doesn't work on my phone. None of that. This working was mission critical to me, therefore I wanted it hardwired, which meant that it ended up being a totally separate system. So these noise canceling headphones aren't part of the whole electronics of the suit. Nope, they go straight out to this little microphone right here. Yeah, this little microphone, and you turn it on and I can hear beautifully inside everything that's happening outside the suit. That was so phenomenal for me. The second part of the comms was actually being able to talk to people outside the suit. And again, if you go to a con, you'll see someone in an elaborate costume, maybe being supported by a couple of friends, and there they are in their giant General Grievous, and they're all like, and their friends are like trying to interpret what they're saying. Speaking from inside a costume is also difficult. Well, the last time you visited a tourist place and maybe went on a guided tourist tour, your tour guide was plausibly wearing a little headset with a speaker on their belt. That's what I bought for this. The speaker sits up here. I took it out of its housing, and then that basically connects right to a microphone. So when you turn it on, that's comms. There we go. So when I turn it on, you can hear me from outside the suit. Yeah, do you know what that turns out? This sound happened the whole time. It turns out that I'm not quite feeding enough amperage to the unit, and it's telling me in Chinese that the power's low. Sorry about that. To all the Chinese people that had to suffer through hearing that, I apologize. However, honestly, once I was wearing this suit, to be able to hear from inside and also speak to outside and have there be no interruption in the conversation I was able to have with my team was a sea change for me. It felt way less claustrophobic to be inside the suit because of the comm system. And all told, about $70 worth of hardware. I think these were like 20 bucks. I think this was maybe 15. I might be getting these prices wrong, but none of this was like super expensive or exotic. It's funny, I ended up starting to think like NASA, right? Like for NASA, every bit of okay, stop. For NASA, every bit of complexity you add is a failure point. And this was the same for me. I didn't want to integrate the microphone speaker to the whole system of the suit because I didn't want to have to go tracing out where the power was wrong. This way, if I have an issue, I could strip the whole thing out and swap in a new one, and I don't have any issues. It was really great to be able to hear inside and to be able to speak outside. That is something I'm going to be incorporating into more cosplays in the future. All right. Battery packs, yes. It is a great time for cosplay with batteries. I mean, 10 years ago, I might have been wearing a bunch of D cells on my belt. These days, lithium-ion battery packs are plentiful. These ones, the talent cells, Jeremy Williams, Tested's own Jeremy Williams, introduced me to these because no matter how long you've been draining them, they don't drain to zero and thus become useless. My DeWalt drill batteries do. They don't have some circuit that stops them from discharging past a certain point. And so you could easily ruin them by throwing them into a circuit that continues to drain them. These talent cells, no matter how long they are, they don't burn themselves out. This thing is a 12.6 volt, 2 amp. It is a fat cell. I ran this thing for weeks and didn't have to recharge it in the run up to wearing these things for real. It has a USB out. It has a 12 volt plug out, so it's both 5 and 12 volts out. I now have 6 of these things. They're absolutely indispensable here in the shop, specifically because of their size and their output. They're just stunning. Okay, so space boots. This is the one that made me feel like the dumbest. The solution for the space boots. The first time I was looking for true space-looking boots was when I was replicating the Alien costume, John Hurt's spacesuit from Alien. Originally, John Malo's crew used a couple of different boots for the Alien suits, and one of them was this sawtooth-soled moon boot, like a snow boot. And I've still never found one of the originals. I've just never achieved it on eBay. And I ended up thinking to myself back when I was making that suit, you know what, maybe I'll just go with white snowboard boots, because to be honest, I'll bet that's what they would go with if they were doing it today. They would dress them up. So I did. When it was time to make these suits, I started looking at snowboard boots. And I was just scrolling through, this is scrolling through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of images. I'm going to shopping sites. I'm looking on Etsy. I'm looking on eBay. I'm looking on the Google. I'm looking at Pinterest. I'm looking at Flickr. I'm looking at every kind of boot I can and trying to find out what my point of view is. And I kept getting nothing. I kept getting absolutely nothing. I found a couple that I liked, but they were also super expensive. I mean, there are some NASA-themed snowboard boots out there, and they're gorgeous, but they're also like, they can be $400 or $500 a pair. And there was part of me that was like, it's just not quite right. And then, I don't know why, but at some point I thought, wait a minute, in super cold places like Canada, where people still work in offices and wear dress shoes, they wear boot covers. They put boots over their dress shoes. And so I searched boot cover, and like the second result was the boot of my dreams. It was this boot here, made by Neos. This was relatively inexpensive. I used some Plasti Dip to make the sole blue. I added some details like the tightening system. I can't remember what that system is called now, but that's like a snowboard binding system. I bought a replacement binding system and just sort of tacked it on here to look like that was what was going on. I changed out the webbing from black to this herringbone, and then I added a bunch of paint and stuff to make it look really old and beat up. But the basics, I barely changed. And this is a process I'm always ending up calling Rumpelstiltskin, because once you know the name of the thing you're looking for, you've cracked its spell. But I looked at literally thousands and thousands of boots under the wrong search parameters. And when I had the right search parameters, this was like the second search result. It is still an endorphin rush to hit the right thing, but boy, did I feel like I had wasted a bunch of time to get there. It's all a process. I showed this to a friend of mine who grew up in Quebec, in Montreal, and specifically in Montreal, and he's like, oh man, just looking at that gives me like cold. It reminds me of how cold Canadian winters are, and I'm not sure I like the memory. Yeah, this absolutely, I'm so happy to have found these. They really completed the suit in the best way, and they were really easy to wear. Guys, this isn't necessarily the end of it. If you have other questions about this suit and its construction, I am happy to answer them. And if you have been inspired to make your own spacesuit constructions, oh my gosh, share links in the comments. I would love to see what you're building. And if enough questions come through for items that I haven't covered here, I will do another one of these videos. Thank you guys so much for joining me. This is Adam Savage in my cave, and happy spacesuit making. I will see you next time.